What's up, everybody? So I'm going to be reviewing book one of Vinland Saga, which I guess encompasses the first two volumes of Vinland Saga. And first and foremost, I just have to say how awesome this edition that they put out is. The fact that it's hardcover. You don't see that a lot with manga, and it's just like, it feels very like, I don't know, official when you have it. Like, it feels important. It feels like it means something when you can kill somebody with it. When you can just hit somebody over the head with a hard book, it just feels more like, I don't know, more special that way. More manga should be hardcover. That's basically all I'm saying. So Vinland Saga was recommended to me by a number of my viewers, and I didn't know anything about it going in. I didn't have any preconceived notions whatsoever, and I also, I'll be straight up 100% honest with you guys, don't really know much about the history in which this story is taking place. It is a fictional story, but it takes place during, I'm not even sure what years, but the Viking era, you know, around England and whatnot, and near Iceland and France and all of those areas. And it also incorporates real-life people from historical figures into the story as well. So I will be honest with you, I am not judging it on the merits of its historical accuracy, nor am I judging it on any preconceived notions about what I had in mind about the story before. All I'm doing is just going off of straight up, right here, just this book. This is all I'm going off of. I haven't watched the anime adaptation, anything, just going off this. And so far I have to say that I am enjoying this. But I'll put a little asterisk because I know a lot of people are saying that this manga is one of the greatest of all time and it stands up right next to Berserk and things of that nature. And from one book or two volumes together, I'm not putting it that high. I enjoyed it, I liked it, I'm going to continue it, but I wouldn't put it on that high of a pedestal. But I'm sure there's much more to come, and it will get better and better and better. So I have some bullet points of things I definitely want to make mention about this book. And am I just going to like wave this around the entire time while I'm talking? I don't know. I feel like I need to do something with my hands. I just want to hit somebody with this. So it starts off when we meet our main mercenary band. I forget if they actually have an overall name for their mercenary band, but they are led by a man named Askeladd. And Askeladd is one of the best characters in this book. Actually, Askeladd and the real main character of this book anyways, Thors, or Thors. I don't know if you're supposed to pronounce the H, if you're pronouncing it correctly. But I'm just going to go ahead and call him Thors. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. And please do. Please feel free to correct me with anything I get wrong, actually, because I always like learning more information about the things I'm trying to read up on or get into and whatnot. So any kind of helpful input, just no spoilers, please. But the thing I want to get into and talk about is basically the philosophy of what I feel like is the main two characters of this book. And I'll try to kind of keep it in order, but I'll start with Askeladd because you kind of get a sense of what this guy is all about right here in the beginning. Because yes, they do make off with all this loot, but Askeladd is not a greedy guy. He's talking to somebody he's related to who's like counting the coins, and he's like obsessed with money, and he's like, you know, money runs the world and everything. And Askeladd's just like, okay, like, yeah, so Askeladd's talking to his uncle, who is just saying, you know, money is the greatest thing ever, basically, like, he's saying, do you really love money that much? And he's like, who doesn't? Money is a wonderful thing, it brightens the heart just to gaze upon it. And Askeladd's just kind of like, has his hand off to his side, just not really caring. And the thing I found most interesting about it was, he was saying, Askeladd is saying about his uncle, he's saying, a slave to gold holds a whip, and beats the slave that he bought with that gold as if to claim that he is the master. Basically saying and representing that like every man is a slave to something. You know, he bought the slave with that money, but without that money is the thing that he's obsessed with, which that he's obedient to. You know, he'll do anything to get more money or to, you know, basically become a slave of that system. And we see that all the time in our own society as well. You know, the 1%, whatever you want to call it. There are people that, of course, will do anything to gain more wealth, even if they're the wealthiest around. It doesn't matter. More and more and more. You know, it's basically you become a slave to the system that you buy into. You know, you've bought into that system and now you depend on it, and so you just kind of keep going forward with that system. A guy like Askeladd, you realize that he really didn't care about the loot at all. Basically what he cared about, or at least this is what I'm getting from it, is that he cared about his crew, his men. Having a good time, basically partying, enjoying the spoils, everybody having a good time, everybody, you know, enjoying life, basically. Askeladd seems to be the kind of guy that's just very laid back and just doesn't really, he's very, living in the now, living for the thrill, or not even living for the thrill, but just taking everything as it comes, not putting too much stock into anything in particular. Because he's saying that every man is a slave of something. So what is Askeladd a slave of? Or perhaps Askeladd is trying to make sure that he's not a slave of anything, that he can always be his own person, be independent, and do as thou wilt. Basically, like not have anything that binds him or controls him, or instead being the one that binds and controls. Because we also see with Thorfinn, who obviously not assuming, is our actual main character, though we don't get to see too much of him in book one, really. So he has manipulated Thorfinn in a way to continue to follow him in some way, and I'm sure we'll see more of the history of that, more of the backstory of that, of did Askeladd actually train Thorfinn in some way, because we get this kind of introductory scene, this prologue, and then we go into a flashback scene, and the flashback doesn't fully catch up to the prologue by the time the end of this book, so we don't get to actually see what Askeladd and Thorfinn had as far as a relationship when Thorfinn was still a child. So Thorfinn obviously is here to try to get vengeance for his father, but he's also working for Askeladd, basically because he doesn't have the power to defeat Askeladd. He's not skilled enough, he's not as in tune as a warrior as Askeladd is, probably because he has way too much rage, but we'll get into that momentarily. So he's waiting for his opportunity, basically, to challenge Askeladd to a fight and defeat him in combat. And it has to be an honorable thing, because we'll get into Thors in a moment, but his father was very honorable and lived by basically like the code of honor that you would. It has to be a duel, one-on-one, face-to-face, using each skills, going all out against each other. So, Thorfinn's not going to poison him in his sleep or try to kill him in his sleep or do something underhanded. He wants to defeat him one-on-one in a battle in order to get vengeance for his father that was killed by Askeladd. And Askeladd knows this and kind of like manipulates him, saying like, who was your father? I don't even remember. And little things like that, even though he knows full well who Thorfinn's father was the entire time, but he's basically just using that to get more rage out of Thorfinn, because the more angry and full of vengeance that he is, the less clear that makes your head. You're acting with emotion, you're not being water, you're not flowing and crashing the way that you should be. You're just all crash, and then that will make you crash and burn. Look at that. Brought it all back around. If that makes sense to any of you guys. I don't know. I follow a lot of Bruce Lee philosophy, so that kind of like made sense to me in there. Just the fact that he would just be so full of vengeance and rage that he just clearly, he can't fight to his maximum potential. He may be like the most powerful dude around that can just like scale the fortress and cut off a dude's head, yeah, but when it comes to facing another warrior one-to-one like Askeladd is, like, you have to have that inner calmness, and Thors had that inner calmness, and I want to get to that. So the real bulk of this book is the history of what happened, how did Thorfinn wind up in Askeladd's care, and we see his father Thors, and we also see a character named Leif Erikson, who I am ashamed to admit, I know he's a real character, but I could only really think of that SpongeBob episode when I was reading that. But Leif Erikson's a real character here, and he's telling stories, and he has been, he's talking about a place that's peaceful, that's away from war, that's because they're all living in Iceland, and it's cold, it's brutal, they're having a really hard time making it through the winter, food is scarce, that kind of thing. And he's talking about a lush, beautiful land, freedom and kind of peace and well-being and whatnot. And what we realize is he calls it Vinland, and everyone thinks it's make-believe and that's just a story, but what we realize by being the reader is that Vinland is actually North America, is what he's talking about, because he's talking about the natives there, and we even see like a Native American from his like memory and whatnot. So Vinland does exist. It's actually North America. I don't know if they'll be calling it Vinland. I don't know if they will even, I'm sure they will get there eventually. So that'll be very interesting to see as well. And Thors, we are introduced to him, Thorfinn's father, and this guy was probably like the baddest of the bad back in the day, right? So he was like the most brutal and skilled warrior that there was for the Vikings, but he decided to give all that up and basically depart, even though he wasn't supposed to, and go to Iceland and try to live peacefully with a group of people. And Thors really learned the hard way that all of this bloodshed and all of these wars and battles and, you know, people constantly fighting each other for territory or spoils or whatnot, he realized that it's all futile. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, his philosophy, there's a lot of like Taoist philosophy with him, I feel like, because he says himself that he is imperfect. Even though he is an amazing warrior, he says that he's imperfect because at times he still has to use a sword. Whether it's to defend or to attack or whatever, but we live in a world where, you know, he hasn't been able to convince either the rest of the world or, you know, the people around him or anything enough to the point where you realize that we don't need to be fighting. We're all human beings and we're all in this together, basically. And he says a true warrior needs no sword. A true warrior needs no sword. And this was one of the most poignant moments in the manga for me, when he throws his sword down, saying that a true warrior needs no sword, because that is basically that philosophy, that Taoist philosophy that's, you know, peace over violence, or it's the action through non-action. It is finding that sense of peace or understanding between everybody. Like, where is everybody coming from? We can kind of get together and understand this in a very rational way. Doing that in a time period where that was like almost unheard of, where people are constantly killing each other all of the time in very brutal and vicious ways. Thors is very calm, he's very meditative, he's very contemplative, he's very centered in himself, and he even tries to tell Thorfinn, you know, like, you don't have any enemies, you know, because what happens is he gets called back into action. Basically, another one of his Viking guys shows up and basically says that you have to come do this because you abandoned us and we need you right now and yada yada, so you got to come and fight with us. And a bunch of the younger people in the group that Thorfinn's around are all excited because they've never been in actual combat before. You know, things have been peaceful here. So you have a bunch of young men that are all like gearing up, they're putting their armor on, they're grabbing swords, you know, all they've done is train, like practice and that kind of sword fighting. So they've never done that before. And they're so excited about it because this reigns true even in our modern society. Like, how much of a pedestal do we put on, you know, fighting and war and the benefits of that? You know, we're constantly told the positive side of war. We're shown the honor. We're shown the rewards, the spoils. You know, being a hero. You know, everyone thinks that they're going to be a hero. Everyone thinks that they're going to be the ones that save the day. You know, they're the main character in the movie that's in their heads. But really, war isn't something like that. You know, it's something that doesn't even need to happen to begin with. You know, if people could just understand that we don't have enemies. You know, we are all one species. We're all part of the universe. We're all, you know, all made of the same stuff when we break her down to our molecules and everything. Not that they knew anything about that in the Viking Age. But what I'm saying is that Thors is basically, you know, way ahead of these guys. He's decades ahead of understanding and philosophy when he's saying that, like, look, we have no enemies. And when he's called back into action, you know, he's taking these boys that want to go fight, but he's basically just doing that to make them happy, you know, to think that he's going to take them, and really he's going to drop them off and then just go himself. He's going to take that burden on his shoulders. And so these things really, really made me connect and like his character because of that, because he is just, his philosophy and his way of life is just so above and beyond everybody else in this book that I just really, really appreciated it. Also, I feel like Thors' philosophy on life does mirror Askeladd's in a little bit of a different ways, because they're both very not ruled by anything. You know, they're not slaves to anything. They are free. They're their own person. They are independent. They do things their way. The only difference is that Askeladd is more like carefree, where he just doesn't care. He's just kind of like letting everything be what it is. He's very, very carefree, whereas Thors is more of like trying to maintain a particular way of order. And I think that's where they clash, is because Askeladd doesn't give a fuck. You know, he'll kill if he has to kill. He'll do this, he'll do that, he'll do these jobs. He's a mercenary, you know? He just, it's a second nature to him. Thors has given all that up. He's like, I don't want to be killing people. I don't want to be doing this. I have to rise above. And Askeladd's just like so aloof with it. And I think that adds to both of their strengths, because that's what keeps Askeladd centered and calm, is because he doesn't really care. And then what keeps Thor centered and calm is that he cares so much. Cares so much about his protecting his way of life and protecting the people around him. And then, of course, the book ends with as Thors is going to drop off all of these young men so that they don't have to fight. Also, Thorfinn, his son, sneaks up on board, and he realizes that they are going to be double-crossed. Like, the person that hired, or not hired, was trying to bring Thors back into the fold, was basically doing it to get Thors out there so that he could put a hit on him, basically hire this mercenary group to kill Thors because he abandoned them once before. So I'm assuming it's some kind of payback for that. There might be something more personal involved with that. I'm not really sure, but I'm assuming it's just because Thors abandoned his Viking way, and so this is kind of like his penance for that. But there could be definitely more to it than that. I'm not really sure. So it breaks down where Thors basically, takes out all these mercenary guys without killing them, because he's not a murderer anymore or anything. And it comes down to a battle between Askeladd and Thors. And they have a good fight. I really enjoyed the fight that they had. Askeladd knows what's happening. Like, he can sense what's happening in the battle. He's like, okay, I know that he's going for my sword. I know that he's trying to do this, but Thors is just one step ahead of him every way. And you get the sense that Askeladd, one, doesn't encounter people that are on his level very much, and Thors is definitely above his level, albeit slightly, and it's definitely something that he hasn't encountered before. And you can see that sense of mutual respect between Askeladd and Thors, because even though Askeladd doesn't follow the warrior's code, where it's like a fair one-on-one fight, yada yada yada, everything Thor stood for, and which is why Thorfinn wants to defeat him in an actual official match in the beginning of the book. But through their fight, you could kind of get the sense that Askeladd definitely is taking a bit of a lesson from Thors, in that, wow, this actually, there might be something to this warrior's code. It's like, it's not me, it's not for me, but I see what you're doing. I appreciate this. I'm not going to kill all these other people. I was only paid to kill you. So Askeladd concedes the duel. He does. He concedes. He concedes that Thors is the better man. However, he wasn't here for the duel. He was here for his target, to get paid. So he agrees that he lost the duel, but then, throws his hand up in the air to signal to his archers who are waiting up above, and they riddle Thors with arrows, which I knew he was going to die. I'm not surprised about that or anything. You obviously know he's going to die, even though he was the best character in this whole book, and then he dies. But he stands there with 12 arrows in him, and he's just he just realizes that this, people just are not going to understand it. People don't understand his philosophy. People don't understand that, look, we don't have enemies. This is all stupid. This is all pointless. And you see that look in his eyes, that look in his face the whole time, where he just he just sighs, because it's well, this is how people are, and I know that might be kind of funny to say it that way, but it's kind of just that you hope for the best, and then you realize how people really act, and you just are I did everything that I could do. He did manage to save his son's life, and Thorfinn sneaks on board one of the ships that Askeladd and his crew takes, and we see him as a child looking pissed off as all hell, looking at Askeladd, wanting some form of vengeance right there. And we see that his fate is to be full of rage. And I'm assuming that one of the main points and philosophies behind the story that we will probably get into as it goes on is the damaging effect of holding on to that grudge and holding on to that rage for so many years, and just wanting to murder Askeladd because of that, even though his father Thors completely preached to him the fact that, of peace and enlightenment, and that you have no enemies, and the fact that Thorfinn needs to be able to get over this in some way without going through the darker path of vengeance. So I'm assuming that that's what it's going to be for. As far as my thoughts about that, I mean, it is a tough one, right? Because I understand the idea of vengeance, right? You would want to do that, especially, he was killed right in front of you and everything. Not literally by Askeladd's hands, but, he had a part in doing that. So you know, it is. I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine how horrifying that would be and what that would do to you psychologically. And hopefully we'll get into that more with Thorfinn, because as of right now, we still don't really, you know, as far as him being this age, you know, as far as him being like a young man or near adult, we haven't really gotten too much with him yet. So we'll see where that goes. I'm sure there's plenty of other characters that we have to meet that are also equally engaging and awesome. And I'm wondering if Thorfinn's going to have a little bit of like Stockholm syndrome with Askeladd too. Like, is he going to look up to him as a father figure, even though he's hating him and trying to kill him? Because I would think that would be the case. Like, if you've spent that much time around somebody, that you would, you know, draw some sort of affection for them, because that's, you know, especially if he helped train him, which I'm assuming he did, or they've gone on missions together and they've reaped the benefits together. It seems like Thorfinn's just constantly thinking about his father, but you would think that there would be a bit of that Stockholm syndrome kind of feeling with Askeladd too. Askeladd going forward as well, he doesn't really have, well, again, it was mostly flashbacks, so I don't really know. I don't know if the next book's going to continue the flashback. I hope it does. Or just jump forward to where we are in the story right now, because this was pretty much all backstory. So I don't really know where the story is going to go from here. Obviously, it's going to have something to do with Thorfinn and Askeladd and having their confrontation built up and everything. So, but I hope there's a lot more to it than that as well. Now, you know me, I'm definitely a character over story kind of guy, so even if the story is a bit weak, if the characters are really, really strong and I'm attached to them and I grow to them, then I'm definitely okay with that. I'd much rather see deep, introspective character moments than just see, you know, the plot has to keep moving forward, plot, 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 plot. Like, I like when we have time to breathe and we can really just like get into a character's head or get into a scene where just two characters are talking, or multiple characters, and just really like invest in a moment rather than constantly needing to move the plot forward. That's just me. I know some people are very plot heavy, but it just kind of depends. Anyway, so like I said, moving forward, I don't really know where it's going to go, because this was mostly all flashback, and I don't know if it's going to continue with the flashback or go to modern times. I do really like Askeladd and Thorfinn. I mean, obviously I like him, but I'm not like super attached to him or anything yet, because I just got to see more from him. Because this was definitely Thor's book, 100%, because he was the main character of this. So we'll see what's going to happen. So thank you guys for recommending this to me. I really did like it. I'm going to continue this series, so be on the lookout for that. More reviews will come in the future. I want to do more manga reviews. I want to start more manga, so anything you guys can recommend. But I am, for the most part, a physical copy kind of guy, so it will take me time to acquire them, because, you know, money. But beyond that, thank you guys very much. Thank you for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. Please comment everything down below about Vinland Saga Book 1. Please try to stay away from spoilers if you can, and just tell me your thoughts, feelings, opinions about this specific book down below. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I will talk to you in the next review.